So as you can see, we are here to talk about Prop 15, and I'm going to start by explaining a little bit about the League of Women Voters. And some of you probably know about the League, but it's worth repeating, particularly a part of it. The League of Women Voters of Diablo Valley is a nonpartisan organization that encourages informed and active participation in government. By nonpartisan, what we mean is that we do not endorse or oppose candidates or political parties, and we never have. And this is something that we are very careful about. We do, though, try to influence public policy through education and advocacy. So education is a little bit of what we're doing here today, but it is more largely advocacy. And by advocacy, we mean that we take positions on issues. And in this case, we're taking a position on Prop 15. And we are saying yes on Prop 15. And the entire California League chose a couple of years ago to start working on Prop 15 in its old iteration, and has continued that work. And Carol and myself and many other people in our local league and leagues up and down the state worked really hard to get the 1.7 million names so that we could qualify for the ballot. It was a very heavy lift. And we are now in the process of trying to encourage people to be engaged in this election and to vote in the election, of course, but also to vote yes. So this is part of the advocacy portion of our league work. So we are nonpartisan in that we don't endorse or oppose candidates or political parties, but we do indeed take positions on issues and have for, of course, since our beginning 100 years ago. Okay, so we wanted to give you an overview at a pretty high level. We will go into more detail about this, both during this presentation as well as at the end when Carol will talk about response to a question that we got in advance. Oh, and I should mention, we very much welcome your questions. You can send them via email to prop15@lwvdv.org. I'll give it to you one more time. It's prop15, the number is 15, of course, at lwvdv.org. So please, if you can take a moment while you're watching this or one comes to mind as soon as we're done, please send us questions. We'd be very happy to answer them as we can at the end. So the main thing that Prop 15 requires is that it reassesses large, and by that we mean in excess of $3 million in aggregate property valuations for commercial and industrial property to fair market value. And by fair market value, that means like if you put your house up for sale, what it would sell for in the marketplace today. So that's the primary thing it does. In addition, though, as a result of that, in our view, it creates a more competitive environment for businesses, and we'll talk about how that plays out by the changes in Prop 15. It does not require any reassessments of residential or agricultural properties, period. And by residential, we mean if you're a renter, if you own a single-family home, if you own a condo, if you own a vacation home. There are no reassessments that change as a result of Prop 15. They are not required, and in fact, they're specifically excluded for residential and agricultural properties. In addition, there's a new tax break. So it includes a tax exemption for equipment and fixtures up to $500,000 for all businesses, and it eliminates the tax on equipment and fixtures for small businesses. And the definition of small business is that they have to have $3 million or less in property valuation. They have fewer than 50 full-time equivalent employees, and they are locally owned in California. So that's a big tax break for all business, but particularly for small businesses. And by equipment and fixtures, we mean, in an agricultural sense, it would mean like plows and agricultural equipment. And in a business sense, it would mean things like computer systems and desks and all of the computer equipment and all the stuff that might be in offices. So this is a big tax break, particularly for small businesses, but it includes all businesses up to the 500K. The revenues that are collected and we'll talk about how much that will be, the revenues that are collected will be distributed based on the current formula in terms of how property taxes are distributed today. So 60% will go to local governments, our counties and cities and municipalities, and 40% will go for K through 12 education, public education, as well as 2 years of community college. That 60-40 split has not changed. That remains the same. Additionally, and this one was a really big one for the league, and I think it should be a big one, of course, for all of us, Prop 15 requires that the uses of the dollars that get allocated to local governments and to education are discussed annually and are reviewed annually so that we as taxpayers and people who are involved in local oversight of government, which is kind of our job in a democracy, there is a requirement that that all be publicly disclosed to us. And we have the right to require that of all of these entities. And finally, and this one I think is important, when we talk a little bit later about the big objections to Prop 15, one of them is that this is a very trying time for all of us. I don't think any of us have lived through a major pandemic and the resulting impact on our economy and the limitations on travel and everything that goes with it. Prop 15, should it pass, does not go into effect January 1 of 2021. There's a phased-in implementation to allow counties to provide and bring up the additional resources that are necessary. A lot of it is new assessors, but it is not required day one for them to start those assessments. And it appears that those assessments wouldn't even start until 2022, 2023. So this will be phased in. It can't happen January 1, 2021. There aren't the resources available in the counties to make this happen. So it will be a phased in approach. So Prop 15 will bring in or reclaim, as we like to say, up to $12 billion, that's billion with a B, per year. So every year, up to $12 billion. The range is $7.5 billion to $12 billion a year. For Contra Costa County alone, that number is $348 million every year. And those dollars, again, will be split between local governments and education. And I'm someone who raised my family in Southern California and then was gone for 8 years and just returned about a year ago. I have to tell you, I have been shocked by the lack of resources our local schools and such have, and the homeless population is just astounding to me. There are significant community needs that our local governments and our educators really need, and the $12 billion statewide and the $348 million annually will very much help provide those resources. Additionally, it is estimated that only 10% of the biggest commercial properties will generate over 90% of the revenue every year. So although the reassessments are required for all property owners, commercial and industrial property owners, again, not residences and not agriculture, are required for those holding $3 million and above in property valuations. It is a relatively small percentage of those companies that are going to provide the overwhelming majority of the revenue that's going to be collected. So 10% will bring in 92% of the revenue. So it's very big organizations, and we'll talk about a little bit about kind of who they are. So what Prop 15 does, the way they do this and generate the $12 billion a year, is that Prop 15 eliminates a commercial and industrial property tax loophole. I'm using loophole only because this is the term that is used by the Prop 15 campaign. And by loophole, I'm not trying to imply that there is anything illegal going on, anything nefarious going on. Businesses will take advantage of loopholes in the tax law if they can. You and I would probably do the same thing if we were in their situation. It is not illegal, but it is a loophole. And we'll talk about how that loophole works. So one of the best examples is Michael Dell. So Michael Dell purchased the Fairmont Miramar Hotel, which is in Santa Monica, and he structured the deal so that no single buyer owned more than, or 50% or more than 50% of the total ownership. And because of that structuring of the deal, it did not trigger a reassessment. So he structured it so that Susan Dell, Mrs. Dell, Michael's wife, owns 49% of the property. Michael himself owns 42.5% of the property. And then they created, legally, an LLC called Miramar Hotel Limited Liability Corporation that owns the remaining 8.5%. So they are evading a reassessment on that property by the way they structured the ownership of the hotel. Again, not illegal at all to do this. So the property was valued in 1996 at $86 million. Michael Dell bought it in 2006 for $200 million. That property, like all properties in California, had appreciated a lot. But Michael Dell and Susan Dell and the Miramar Hotel LLC are paying property taxes on the $86 million because the way they structured the deal did not trigger a reassessment. LA County would like to get the money that is out there for this because our roads need to be in good shape, our schools need to be in good shape. All the things that are bringing people to the Fairmont Miramar Hotel and are providing the folks who are coming there to stay there, all of that infrastructure surrounding the hotel in that community has to be paid for by somebody. And it is not coming at the fair market value through the Miramar Hotel because of the way it was structured. Another example that's a little different, but might make this seem a little more real, and that is these two gas stations, same community. One is a Chevron, one is a Gas and Stop. And as you can see, the Chevron has a valuation of $15 per square foot. The Gas and Stop, on the other hand, has almost a tenfold higher per square foot amount at $124. And that's because Chevron's been there for a long time and the property hasn't been sold, so it hasn't triggered a reassessment. But the Gas and Stop is kind of new. So the property valuation when they bought it was a whole lot higher. You would think in this situation that Chevron would be charging less because they're paying almost 1/10 in property taxes of the Gas and Stop. Instead, they're charging, in this example, $3.50 a gallon, and the Gas and Stop is charging $3.11. And this is the example I wanted to use to talk about kind of an unlevel playing field for businesses. If I'm the Gas and Stop, I'm thinking, why is my competitor right down the road paying such a low property tax amount when I'm paying so much? That's not fair. And that is true for any businesses that are new, that are coming in and paying fair market value more recently versus some businesses that have been around a really long time. And it impacts some super big businesses like Disney and others who have property valuations that are from the 1970s. So I think there is an equity issue here in terms of supporting local communities and what local communities need to provide infrastructure, education, et cetera. There's also a market competitiveness issue here. And this is just one example of how this plays out in different communities across the state. So one more time, residential and agricultural property taxes are not going to change as a result of Prop 15. It's not going to affect your home. It's not going to trigger any new reassessments. That will only happen if you sell your home. And as someone who just bought a home a year ago in Walnut Creek, I know how those property values have gone up. And for all of us, they have, and that's a good thing. But this Prop 15 will not impact residential and agricultural property taxes that we pay. I mentioned the $500,000 tax exemption for fixtures and equipment. This means a lot for small business. This is a tax reduction for small businesses and all businesses. And it was an important thing to include in Prop 15 to show support for small businesses and to provide a tax break. I think many of us in the state, whether we own businesses or not, feel like we pay a lot of taxes here, and we do pay a lot of taxes. It was important to make sure that it was not going to disproportionately hurt small businesses up and down our state. They are vitally important to our economy and to the livelihood of many people that we are in our communities. So I mentioned about strict accountability of the revenue. I think this is incredibly important as the league works on kind of good governance. And part of what we do is we observe, in this case, because we're Contra Costa County, the Board of Supervisors in Contra Costa County. It is incredibly important when, particularly when new taxes are levied, in this case again, 3 million plus large commercial and industrial property taxes, that there is some accountability for how those dollars are used. And I think the requirement in this is explicitly stated that it has to happen annually, and we as taxpayers and citizens have a right to hear that annually in terms of a presentation about how this, what monies came in and what the money was spent on. Because that's part of our job, overseeing government and making sure money that is collected is used in ways that we all collectively think are the right things. So this is a very important part of Prop 15. So you can see here a list of the organizations that are supporting Prop 15. It is a varied list of kind of community organization and others. And there's one that's not on there that is an important one, and it is the Minority Business Consortium. And they are a very important partner because they're a business partner and a business consortium. But as you can see, it's a number of organizations, many of which you probably know. And this group of folks has been working for the last 2 years. First, to qualify it for the ballot. Again, it was 1.7 million signatures to qualify it for the ballot. And now to make sure that we all get out and tell the story about Prop 15 so people understand what it does and frankly what it does not do. There are folks on the other side, of course, and here are 3 of them. It's the California Business Roundtable, California Taxpayers Association, and the Paramount Group. And the Business Roundtable is CEOs and COOs of large companies, leading companies as they call it in California. The California Taxpayers Association is essentially, it looks like a kind of a lobbying group. And the Paramount Group calls itself the best-in-class owner-operator of Class A office properties across the country, New York City, DC, and San Francisco. And in fact, they own $1 billion worth of commercial space in San Francisco. So you can see why these groups probably wouldn't like this. It will indeed, for large industrial and commercial properties owners, it will indeed require reassessment and a payment of taxes based on fair market value. So for some particularly very big companies that have been around a long time in the same place, the amount they pay is definitely going to go up. That's how we're generating $12 billion a year. There are 3 primary objections, and I would love it if any of you who have heard other objections or things you're concerned about, please submit them through the email. But the primary objections that we have heard is that it doesn't protect small business or agriculture. And I think if we've shown this won't impact small business or small businesses or agricultural properties, certainly at the get-go. It could change for small businesses down the road, and there is some language in there that says that might happen. But starting at the beginning, small businesses are exempt from property reassessments, as are agricultural properties. There is concern, and I think it's unfortunately used in sort of a scare tactic, that Prop 15 is the slippery slope, I'm putting that in quotes, slippery slope to reassessment of all properties. And I think the bottom line here is they're coming to get your home, watch out. And I can only say, and I've already said it once, but I can only say this is a huge effort to get it on the ballot and then to get it passed. We hope it passed, but it might not. There would have to be a similar, if not a bigger effort to make this impact any other part of property taxes, whether it's included in the original Prop 13 from 1978 or not. This only impacts large commercial and industrial properties. and it gives a tax break to all companies, particularly small businesses. And the final thing is that a number of people have told me personally, actually, that this is just the wrong time. Don't be putting a tax increase now when so many particularly small businesses are suffering. And all of us are suffering. This is an economic shock. And I know I said before, but this will be phased in. Nothing will be happening January 1, 2021. It will be phased in, and that will start in 2022 to 2023. And the focus will be on the largest properties that are out there. And again, not small business, not agriculture, not residential. And I would also, I guess, submit that I think these groups, no matter what the tax was, they would say it was the wrong time to do it. There is, I don't like paying more taxes either, and I totally understand it, and I am, I think, aware of this issue. But I think by the phased-in approach of this, we hope to be fully through COVID within the next year and a half. And again, it's going to be up to the assessors how they will approach this. But the way we understand it is that they will go after the largest properties first.
Great.
So this is a quote, and just because of Gerald Ford and for this group, I thought this really worked. I'll just read it for you. The measure would require office buildings, factories, and other commercial property to be taxed on what they're actually worth today, not what they were worth when Gerald Ford was president. And I can barely remember when Gerald Ford was president. That was a long time ago. And I thought this quote, and this is from Cal Matters, I thought this quote just sort of put it right in the right context. So this is a bit of an editorial, of course. So we will come back for questions, and Carol is going to jump in and talk about, provide a little bit more detail and answer any questions that people have. But because we are the League of Women Voters, we couldn't, and it is a presidential election year, we couldn't miss an opportunity to just give you a very quick update on what's going on in terms of the election. So in less than a month, September 24th, the voter information guides will be mailed to every registered voter. And then not long after that, this is coming up pretty soon, October the 5th, we will all get our mail-in ballots, and they will be mailed to every registered voter up and down the state. Also on October 5th, in-person voting begins in Martinez, and the ballot drop boxes will be opened. Means if you get it on October 5th or 6th or 7th, you can fill it out quickly and get it in a drop box quickly or a mailbox. October 29th, so that's the weekend before the Tuesday election, 16 early voting sites will open. So for those folks, maybe some of the 25% who didn't vote by mail in the primary, they will have early voting sites to go to across the county that they can go to if they choose to go there versus going to their polling place. November 3rd, of course, is Election Day. Any mail-in ballot must be postmarked November the 3rd, but there is an additional 17 days for the Board of Elections to receive that ballot. So there's a lot of lag time. And there was, of course, concern about what's going on with the post office, et cetera. So best bet is to get it into a ballot drop box, probably. So I mentioned the 25%. Over 75% of us voted by mail in March. And that's a huge high number. The Board of Elections, though, is really focused on the 25%. And I've had the privilege, really, of being in Zoom calls like this with a number of representatives from the county elections. And they are really focused on making sure that the people who didn't vote, the 25% that didn't vote by mail in March, understand what their options are to either vote by mail this time or to go to an early voting site or indeed to go to their polling place. So that is a real focus for the Board of Elections. In addition, our county decided to upgrade their postal service accounts. So instead of mail going bulk mail, everything is now first-class postage, which means that it will have first priority and getting out the door and where it needs to be delivered. Polling places, and I'm a poll worker. I was a poll worker in March, and I'm going to be a poll worker again in November. The Elections Board is working really hard to ensure that people who choose to go to their polling place, and there are people who only want to go to their polling place. That's the way they vote. That's the way they've always voted, and they want to have that option. Personal distancing and safety protocols will be in place to make that option as safe as we can for Contra Costa County residents. There will also be expanded programs for ballot return and in-person voting. I talked about the early voting sites. There will be 16 of them, which will be open starting October 30 and ending November 3rd. There will be 37 ballot drop boxes across the county, open the same dates. And there will still be 150, and maybe more, they keep adding them, polling places around the county for those folks who want to go to their polling place. I already talked about the additional 17 days, first-class postage. This one I love. All ballots, even the mail-in ballots, will include an I voted sticker, which many of us love to go and get our I voted stickers. Everybody seems to love that. So once you have filled out your mail-in ballot and got it in the mail, you can very proudly say, I voted, and put it on your jacket or your shirt. There is also something called the Ballot Tracks tool, which allows you to track your ballot to make sure it gets received there. And I want to give you, forgive me for looking this up, but I want to give you the address to send that, to sign up for Ballot Tracks. And it is where'smyballot.sos, it stands for Secretary of State, .ca.gov. So if you want to know, once you've mailed in your ballot, where it is in the process, up until the time that it is received, you can sign up for this, and they communicate with you either by phone, text, or email, which I think is pretty cool. where'smyballot.sos.ca.gov. So pretty cool tool. And then the final thing is we have a electronic voting tool. It's called Voter's Edge. I hope some of you have used this in prior years. Voter's Edge is a League of Women Voters tool, and it allows you to view your ballot, find your polling place if you want to vote in person. It lets you look at all of the candidates and the answers to all the candidates' questions that we've asked them in their own language. It lets you see the propositions and pros and cons on each of the propositions on the ballot, which is a really good tool. And it also lets you see who's financing the campaigns and the ballot propositions, which is important, we think. That's why we included it in this. And we think it's important for folks to have the ability to look up and see where the money's coming from in support of these different campaigns and ballot measures. So we encourage everybody to go to votersedge.org. It will be live in just, I have to ask Carol, in a week or so, I think, or a couple of weeks.
Weeks. We're getting the information right now from all the candidates, so it takes a little while.
Cool. So it'll take a little bit. We'll have to get a little bit more into election season. We haven't even hit Labor Day yet, so we're working really hard to get the responses from all the candidates so we can have a really fulsome look at all the candidates and the ballot propositions. But it's a super tool, and it is nonpartisan. So again, this was advocacy for us by supporting Yes on 15. Voter's Edge is completely nonpartisan. It's part of our educational mission, and it will provide pros and cons on 15 and the other ballot measures as well. Okay, so we'll turn it over to questions.
Before I go to questions, I just wanted to remind people that you don't need to put a stamp on your ballot. That's prepaid, so you can just drop it in and we'll go back, because our county will pay for first class mailing, which is really great. Our county's really good at tracking everything. And Janet has been mentioning pros and cons. We are advocating in this program for Prop 15, but we will still be running our regular pros and cons program. We won't be able to do them in person the way we usually have, but we are figuring out how to do two pieces. One of them is we will be trying to figure out Zoom meetings, and Rossmoor is one of our main programs that we work with. And the other is there will be, we're working to videotape the information that we have now. The problem with the videotaping is that we will put together a pros and cons program. We won't necessarily be able to be as up to date with all of the information the way that we are when we're able to do when we're doing it in person. But we will do a combination of those video pros and cons, which will be accessible on our league website, and doing Zoom meetings. So we will be able to do both sides of the story if you want to be able to look at that. And but now I'm going to go back to doing my advocacy. Thank you again for letting us be part of all of this. I just noticed that Paul has put up both the email for more questions in case you come up with anything, and Catherine will make sure that I get them. But Paul also put up the ballot tracks information, so that's on your chat screen, so you can see that. The one and only question we got was from Olga, whose last name I've forgotten now. And her question, which is a very comprehensive question, was what do we think about, or how would we respond to the East Bay Times article, which a lot of people saw? And I thought I would just go ahead and try and respond to that paragraph by paragraph because it's so comprehensive. I think it covers almost everything. Let's see, I think that article was on August 28th, but it's somewhere in that time frame if you need to go look it up, if you want to look that up. The first statement that it made is the properties, commercial and homeowners, residential, are reassessed when they're sold. And that's true. That's true for all homeowners. And it is true for commercial properties unless they use the 50% ownership rule. And the ownership rule is my term for it. As you saw when Janet was talking about what Michael Dell had structured. So he managed to get around being reassessed. A closer to home example is there's a Park Tower in San Francisco, and it is assessed at $1.1 billion, or it's not assessed that way. It's valued at that. It's about $1,444 per square foot. They actually were able to keep their property tax assessments because 49% of the Park Tower was bought by Heinz Interests and Hong Kong Monetary Authority. They actually pay $6.6 million in their property tax. They save $6.6 million in their property taxes every year because they don't have to pay it on the market value, the time of selling, because they were able to use that less than 50% ownership change. This happens a lot. As Janet said, it's completely legal. That there's nothing illegal that they're doing. They're just making regular, standard, good business decisions. But it does mean that it reduces what is available for the common good. Residential properties are in fact sold more often than commercial properties. In, I think it was 2017 or 2018, the realtor statistics that I was able to find is that homeowners usually turn over their property every 7 to 9 years, or homes are turned over about every 7 to 9 years. I think the point was being made that the reason that the property owners, homeowners are paying more than commercial property is because of that rapidity of the turnover. I want to point out, though, that pre-Prop 13, which was about 40 years ago, property rates were closer to 2.5%. Post-Prop 13, property rates dropped to 1%. That just by itself would have accounted for a 50% drop in the property taxes, property revenues that would have come in. 44% of property tax revenues was paid by commercial properties. Now it's 28%. Nobody's doing anything illegal. We're not accusing anybody of doing anything illegal, but that's a very big drop. And it is, I think it is in large part because there are these other ways that commercial properties can get around being reassessed that homeowners don't use. If Prop 15 is passed, when the proposition is fully implemented, and it will take time to phase in, the projections are that commercial properties statewide will really still only come up to 38%. Los Angeles, which has a lot of properties, they're projected to go from the current 29% to 43%. Again, 92% of this new revenue is going to come from 10% of the large commercial properties. There is, as Janet mentioned, a business personal property tax relief piece, and that's to help all businesses. All businesses will get at least $500,000 every year that they can write off. And for small businesses, it's 100% every year. So that's a nice piece of a savings that they'll get. We are really concerned about those small businesses. One of the points that the East Bay Times article was making is that there's an enormous disparity between the long-term property owners and the newer property owners. And we think that Prop 15 will do a lot towards what we are calling leveling the playing field. What we're doing is asking for all the large commercial properties to be regularly reassessed. Most other states do this. We will be in California asking for probably about a 3-year cycle. That's what we're thinking that it's going to end up being. It will mean that large commercial properties, will have some kind of predictability about them and about what they'll be paying. And public agencies that rely on property taxes will have some kind of predictability as well. Another piece of this that is important to remember is our state property tax is among the lowest in the country, and it's at 1%. Again, pre-Prop 13, it was 2.5% about, and now it's 1%, and that rate is going to stay the same. It is true that there were major advantages if you bought early. One of my favorite examples is Disney in Burbank, California. Disney Grand Central Creative Campus pays $18.16 per square foot because their property valuation is based on property values from 1997 and 1999. In 2008, NBC Studios bought land very close to it, also in Burbank. They're paying $186 a square foot. That's an enormous difference between the two. And I think there's an equity issue that is a piece there. Santa Clara, closer to home, Intel is assessed at $225,000 an acre, and that's in Santa Clara. Adobe paid $27 million an acre, and they're in San Jose. And then even closer still, across the bay in Marin, in Corte Madera, there is the town center, which is owned by a Chicago management firm, and they're assessed at $13 to $249 a square foot, depending on which piece of their property you're looking at. The Village at Corte Madera, which is basically across the street, it's a publicly traded company from Santa Monica. They're assessed at $12 to $46 a square foot. Those are very, very big differences. Now, it does mention in that article that it's not addressing residential or agricultural lands. And both, again, are protected, as are small businesses. The small businesses have a specific definition, as Janet pointed out. So for this Prop 15, there are very specific definitions that are in each agency has their own kind of definition. So it's important to remember that for Prop 15. There was a complaint about the 40% versus the 60% split in the way the monies are going to get dispersed. That's nothing that we have any control over. That is the state formula for the way that property taxes are dispersed. So that's just the way the law is now. That's following the law as it is. They bring up this really interesting county assessor named Larry Stone. I think he's really interesting because he both opposes Prop 15, but he also opposed Prop 13. He said about Prop 13 that it gave benefits to both the businesses and the homeowners, but the businesses weren't suffering, the homeowners were. His objection at the recent Santa Clara Board of Supervisors meeting seemed to be that Prop 15 was too difficult to scale up he said that small businesses would be crushed by the rapidity of the reassessments. He said that it was too difficult to scale up in terms of his work. There's a couple of answers. One, Prop 15 sets aside money for the assessors. So there's money in there so that it addresses this problem exactly. One. Two, there's, as Janet mentioned earlier, there is no way that we're expecting, or that the proposition is expecting, this to be put into place in 2021. It actually wouldn't start to ramp up till 2022. Depending on what the definition is of small businesses, it might not ramp up till 2025 to 26, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. There is a timeline, and the assessors have some control over the whole process. So they're both getting money to cover this, so they'll be able to hire more people. Seems like to me, especially in this day and age and this time when so many people are struggling, being able to hire more assessors is a really good thing. The interesting thing is also that their board of supervisors in Santa Clara, where he's the assessor, they endorsed Prop 15 as a really necessary tax, that they really felt that was important to do. They heard residents saying that commercial landlords are already charging market rates, irregardless of whatever their property taxes were. So that there was a lot of pushback, and a lot of thought that there shouldn't be the assessors shouldn't have a problem. I want to point out that before 1978, before Prop 13, the assessors did this every year. They did this all the time. In fact, that's part of what pushed Prop 13 to the fore, is that people were getting assessed so frequently, and it was such a large reassessment. So they're getting more money to be able to do this. They're being allowed more time to do it. They're not being expected to reassess everybody all at once. There's a whole process that goes on, and it's something that they used to do. So it's hard to understand why they wouldn't be able to do this now. So that's sort of my response to that little piece of it. There was a comment about the triple net lease scenario, which has to do with the way that a tenant might have rented their property. So if there's a large commercial piece of property and there is a small business that is a renter on that piece of property, they may have signed a lease that allows the landlord to pass along any increases in property taxes. And that is a concern. We're hoping that, well, to begin with, this Prop 15 was written before COVID happened, so we hadn't been able to anticipate that, but we did anticipate that this might be a problem and it might get passed along. The thinking about it is that your property tax is not really tied to the rent. The landlords may in fact pass that property tax along. That is their right to do if that's what's written into their lease. The hope is that they won't do that, because your rent, as was pointed out in the Board of Supervisors meetings in Santa Clara, the rent is pretty much being charged at property at market value right now. So there's a hope that there won't be a push to increase that. There was some concern mentioned in the article about large increases to consumers, and that being passed along. And just as an aside, Amazon, a lot of large companies, and Amazon is a great example, they got in 2018, they got a tax refund of $181 million on their US profits of $10.8 billion. They had a -1% tax rate. So large commercial properties, they may pass those along, but it would be really hard for them to, it would be hard to understand why they would do that, because it's such a small percentage of their profits. we really share those concerns about small businesses. As I said, Prop 15 was put on the ballot with 1.7 million signatures before the pandemic. So that was before sheltering in place and before COVID were part of the calculations. Part of why we took a long, for those of you who remember, we had actually tried to, and we were successful in collecting enough signatures to put an earlier version of what is now Prop 15 on the ballot, and then we pulled it because we were worried then, before all of the pandemic, about small businesses. So we actually raised the bar so that a small business was not defined by what was initially $2 million, but we moved it to $3 million among some of the other changes. Let me say that when we looked at bigger numbers and commercial properties across the state, 4% of commercial properties are assessed between $3 and $5 million. We think most of this money is going to come from properties that are assessed at over $5 million, and there aren't that many. Pre-Prop 13, commercial properties paid 44%, and again, now they're only contributing 28%. When Prop 15 gets fully implemented, if it gets passed, it's only going to bring commercial property share up to 38%. So it's substantially more money for the recipients. It's not really going to meet where it had been before. And again, 92% of this projected revenue is going to come from 10% of the largest commercial properties. All businesses, again, will get a $500,000 write-off for their personal business tax. Small businesses will get 100% write-off, and that's every year. And just as a reminder, all businesses can write off their taxes, and you and I are limited now to $10,000, but they can write off their taxes every year. Now there's another little piece that might help tenants, and we're really hoping it will. If 50% or more of the property is leased to small businesses, so you have a commercial piece of property, but they're renting it to a lot of smaller businesses, if half of them are small businesses as defined by Prop 15, the reassessment's not going to get triggered until 2025 to 26. And the thinking behind that was that hopefully that will give properties time to either renegotiate or look for a different place if they feel like they're going to get a big increase in their rentals. I've heard two things. I've heard both that most of those kinds of small business leases are signed from 3 to 5 years, but I've also heard that they're longer, that they're more like 10 years. So I don't really know, because both of those are numbers that came up with my research. I'm not sure which one is more valid at this point, and it probably depends on where you're located. For small businesses that are tenants in larger buildings where 75% of the building is residential, they won't get reassessed. Those are properties where maybe there's a ground floor that's businesses and the upper floors are residents. If there's a residential, the 75% is residential, they will be exempt from reassessments. So that may make a difference in the way that businesses start to put their pieces of property together. Again, we think that rents are market driven. So we're hoping that property owners who have benefited from these long-term, much smaller property taxes will, when they are reassessed, they're already renting their properties at market rate. We're hoping that they will continue and not make big changes there. There are sort of two different ideas that might happen with COVID. If more people are staying home, they're working distance, maybe businesses could rent smaller spaces and not need as much space, and that might be helpful. On the other hand, maybe businesses need to distance, and as they're bringing their employees back, maybe they need more space because they need to have more distance between the people. We really can't tell. That might end up being a wash. We don't really know. Maybe these needs will cancel each other out. we would like to be able to be more confident that our small businesses are going to be protected, but we're not really able to predict any of that. We're really hoping that the extended reassessment timeline will mean that the current crisis and the current economy will have recovered, and there'll be a surge in businesses, and we will be able to, this won't be a problem for the small businesses. We know that the Prop 13, when it was implemented, it dramatically reduced the reliable and predictable revenue stream for the schools and for our local governments. Prop 13 was passed overwhelmingly by California voters because of what it was doing to their home values and their property taxes. Over the past 40 years, commercial businesses have really benefited from that. And as Janet pointed out, having been here, gone away, and come back, we can really see the results of what's happened to our schools and our local governments. California schools are now 39th per pupil spending, in staffing ratios for teachers, for guidance counselors, for librarians. In 1977, pre-Prop 13, we were 7th in the country. California has always been able to offer employers a very well-educated workforce. It's been one of the major draws. We really feel like being able to support our schools is crucial. Prop 15 now is an important step towards making the commercial properties pay their fair share to support the benefits that we all use and we all want and we all need. 29% of UC grads start at community colleges. 51% of CSU grads start at community colleges. 75% of our nurses, our firefighters, and our EMTs train at community colleges. We really are excited that Prop 15 is going to support that two-year institution. The money that will go, again, is set by the way that property taxes are legally distributed now. But it's going to pay for teachers or aides or nurses or books or computers, in-person and distance learning, special ed, sports programs, art and music. There are a lot of needs that schools have that we've been paying for using bonds and supplemental taxing ourselves actually to make up for the shortfall. This money will also support the counties and the unincorporated areas, rural communities, budgets that are covering mental health, healthcare clinics, social services that we all really need, especially we have parks and recreation, we need them, first responders, clean water, transit infrastructure, street maintenance, our libraries. We all benefit from these. They're services we all use, we all need, and they support the common good. And we really feel like this is an opportunity for the large commercial properties that have benefited from not having the same kind of property taxes to step up and pay their share. So we're hoping that you will join us in supporting Prop 15. And we hope we're answering your questions. I think there's another question.
There is a question. I can actually read it to you if that's easier. So thank you so much, Carol. That was terrific. We have a question from Linda Wallonen. Hope I'm saying that correctly. And it's a little bit of a kind of an election and political question. Do you think that having another proposition on the ballot, Prop 19, that changes Prop 13, diminishes the chances for Prop 15 to be approved? And I think the question is, will Prop 19 kind of confuse voters, et cetera, and maybe make it less likely that Prop 15 will be approved?
You know, I haven't studied Prop 19, so I can't really make a good assessment there. So I'm really sorry, you're going to have to come to pros and cons. There was actually this tactic where the opposition was putting forward another proposition that sounded similar to what we've put forward. They ended up pulling it because they couldn't really get the number of, and we were very relieved because it would have confused everybody, and there were enough similarities so that it would have been very hard to keep straight. So I don't really know the answer.
So I think Paul is going to open up the chat. And I know I'm keeping an eye on the time. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. But if people have additional questions, we probably have time just for a couple of questions. But please feel free to use the chat now. It has just been opened up. And I'd just like to reiterate something Carol said that I think is super important. Prop 15 does not change the tax rate. It will remain at 1%. And that tax rate is low. In fact, it's lower than Texas. It's lower than New York. And it is the need to have reassessments at market values is something that will obviously bring in dollars for us. It will right-size the business environment, but nothing will change about the tax rate. The 1% stays as is.
Yes, and that's really, really important. So thank you for underscoring that, because it is one of the lowest in the country. People often say that we are such a highly taxed state, but the tax rate is quite low, and there are many states, I think Washington's among them, that reassess almost annually, and this will not actually extend that. We're not going to.
So another question has come in. This one's from Ellen Prasida, and it is, how much of the money will go to additional administrative costs? Super good question.
We don't really know. I'm not sure that I'm understanding the question correctly, but I can. So I hope I'm getting to it. So the money that's set aside for the schools, which is 40%, 11% of that 40% will go to the community colleges, and the 89% will go to school districts. And then those school districts and those community colleges will be able to decide how they want to allocate those funds. And those are decisions that are made locally. And the parallel happens at the local governments. So 60% will go to local governments. In Contra Costa County, we will be getting, when it's fully implemented, so it's not going to happen right away, but when it's fully implemented, we're anticipating that there'll be about $348 million every year. That will get distributed to different communities. So each of those local agencies will decide exactly how that's going to get spent. And it can get spent however they choose to. There's no state there's state oversight, but there's no state interfering with those decisions. It'll be a local decision. I think the other question is, if there's polling done on voter support for Prop 15? I don't know. All I can say is that, yes, I think there has been, but I don't have those numbers. I was looking at them today, but I didn't write them down. It is more than half that are currently supporting Prop 15. I think there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation that's out on Nextdoor, which we're very worried about. Some of you may, if you follow the courts, you may be aware that there was a court decision that came down recently that required the opposition to pull the language that they were proposing for the voter information ballot. And that's really, it was very upsetting to read that what they were proposing to insert in the ballot. And we're glad that the courts came through and refused to let that go forward. So that would have confused the issues. And I can get up for a second and see if I can find that sheet. There was a full disclosure. There was a requirement that the advocacy side, the pro side, make sure that they not say all small businesses were protected, because all small businesses are not protected. If you, there's a specific definition for small business, and if you're a small business tenant, you may not have the same kinds of protections than if you are a small business who owned your own property. So that that was why they said that we couldn't say all, which I think was very important to do. A property might be owned by multiple entities. There are many ways that could be sort of rephrased. But what was interesting was that the judge, which is a Superior Court judge, the opposition had wanted to say that it would raise property taxes on, that the legislature would then be able to raise property taxes on homeowners, which it absolutely does not do and cannot do. I don't know what the exact language was. I hope that they were saying that it would be the slippery slope, but I didn't really see that. But in any case, that language has to be out. That language has been seen on Nextdoor, though. So that's a big problem, is that people are thinking that that's going to affect your homeowner, and that's not at all true. They also were saying in the opposition arguments that if you were running your small business out of your home, that you would be taxed. It could be, your property tax could be increased. And that's not true. If you're running your small business out of your home, that is completely protected, and you are exempt from reassessment. So any home-based business is not going to be taxed at all. It will not be affected.
So Karen, let me just jump in really quickly. We've had a couple of questions just for you to be thinking about.
Okay.
Does Prop 15 need 50% approval or higher, and versus 2/3, of course? Right. And the second one is, how many assessors will be hired? Who will be doing the hiring? And how much is their salary projected to be?
Okay, so the last piece that I want to say about the lawsuit was that there was language that the opposition wanted to put into the voter ballot saying that there would be no accountability. And there is very strict accountability. It will be very, in fact, there's a requirement in the proposition that the language be understandable, which I really appreciate because I'm not a lawyer. So it was important that those things happened and those things were put forward. In terms of, it needs, to pass, it needs 50% plus one. So because of the way that it's written and because of what it is. So we're hoping that we'll be able to pass it. In terms of assessors, I don't really know. I would love to know what assessors make, but I expect that it's more complicated than just being able to say that there's a certain kind of graph. I know that there's money in there for the assessors. I don't know how they decide which assessors or which counties get more money or less money. I don't know how they're going to split that up, but I do know that it is written into the language of the proposition that there is support to hire them and to train them. So I'm sorry, I can't be more specific than that. I suspect that that each county office will be hiring their own assessors. I can't imagine why the state why you wouldn't do it that way, but there are many surprises in this world for me, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, I understand too, and I think I read that each county will be responsible for determining how many assessors they want to hire. And I suspect too that the salaries might vary based on what part of the state you're in. But I think they're pretty good jobs, actually. I can't give any more definition than that, but they're reasonably well-paid jobs.
Mm-hmm. And I think they're going to be not a temporary job, because I think this is going to be going on for a while. I think they need to ramp up. They're not, I don't think they're ramping up and expecting to do, all 10% of these large companies in 1 year. I know they're not. So the assessor's office also will have a decision to make about who they're going to reassess and how, and the assumption, the logical assumption is that they're going to reassess the larger pieces of property first, because they're going to bring in much more money. But there's no guarantee. It's up to the assessor's office.
Well, I don't see any more questions here, so we'll give it maybe another minute or so. But I want to thank everybody for attending. I know there's a lot of information that was presented. I truly appreciate Carol adding a lot of meat to the bones from what I talked about. It's the devil is in the detail in a lot of these things, and it's very important to know some of that detail as you make a determination on how to vote in November. Again, thank you very much for being here. If there are additional questions that come through, you're welcome to send them to Pat, and Pat can probably get them to us or send them to the mailbox, and we will get them that way as well. Let's see. Paul is just saying, we'll allow you to unmute yourself. If you have a question you would like to ask in person, please raise your hand, and we can help guide the conversations.
And if there aren't any, I just want to remind everybody that there'll be a recording of this so that you can go back and review things that you maybe missed or you want clarified. This is new for us, so we're hoping to get this recording. We won't have it posted tomorrow. Hopefully it will be posted fairly soon. But when we do have it, we'll send it to Pat, who will send it through the connection channel so that everybody will know how to access that. So thank you very much. We really, really appreciate this. Your great questions, because you're
a great group.
Okay,
thank you, everybody. I think we'll call it a night, and appreciate Pat and the whole group for being here, and certainly Pat